Life was calm and peaceful for me most of the time, and my service dog was the reason why I could handle the world better than before, because without her I would often feel lost and powerless, and she gave me courage to step outside, to meet people, and even to breathe properly when the days felt heavy. She was not just a dog to me but family, my lifeline, and my anchor, and every morning I would wake up to her wagging tail and soft eyes that seemed to say that everything would be okay. She was trained to sense when I was anxious. She could guide me away from overwhelming situations, and she could press her body close to calm my shaking hands. She was more than loyal. She was love in its purest form, and most of the neighbors in our small community knew about her role in my life. Many of them respected the bond we shared, and sometimes they would smile and wave when we went out for a walk. But not everyone felt the same, because not long after we moved into the new neighborhood, a woman known as Karen made it very clear that she did not approve of us. At first I thought it was just her being unfriendly, but soon her cold stares and whispered complaints grew sharper. She muttered things about the dog being messy, noisy, and a problem for the HOA, though in truth my service dog was gentle, quiet, and trained better than most people's pets. Still, Karen's eyes always followed us with irritation. She made faces when my dog walked across the lawn, and she even once muttered that dogs should not be allowed at all. I tried to ignore it because I believed in peace and I did not want conflict. I thought maybe she was just stressed, or maybe she would get used to us over time. So I stayed polite. I smiled and greeted her even when she gave me nothing but silence. My dog wagged her tail toward her too, innocent and hopeful, as if she wanted to win Karen's heart the way she won everyone else's. But Karen's face stayed hard, and behind those eyes there was something bitter I could not explain. Weeks passed and I started noticing strange things, like Karen standing at her window whenever I took the dog out, or her stepping into her yard only when we returned from our walks. One time she even took pictures with her phone. Though when I asked politely if there was a problem, she snapped back that the HOA would deal with it soon. Her words made me uneasy, but I tried not to overthink because the dog was my main focus and she kept me grounded. Still, the tension was growing in. The air in my chest tightened whenever Karen was around. It felt like a storm was building, though I could not see it yet. Then one afternoon, as the sun was setting and the sky was painted orange and gold, I noticed Karen outside holding a spray can. She was pretending to work on her garden fence, but her eyes were not on the wood. They were locked on my dog, and her hand tightened around the can in a way that made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe it was nothing, maybe just paint or cleaner, but something about her posture and the way she smiled without warmth made me uneasy. I told myself I was imagining it, because surely no one would ever harm a service dog. Not when the law protected them. Not when it was obvious she was more than just a pet. But Karen's smirk stayed in my mind long after I walked back inside. My dog rested her head on my lap that evening, calm and trusting, unaware of the danger that might be forming right next door. And I stroked her soft fur and whispered that she was safe with me, but deep inside I wondered if that was true, because sometimes storms hide in silence before they finally break. And I had no idea that the storm was already closer than I could see, waiting for the moment to strike and change everything we knew. The next morning began like any other, with sunlight slipping through the curtains and my service dog nudging me awake with her wet nose and gentle eyes full of patience, as if reminding me that no matter how heavy my mind felt, the world outside still waited for us. I got ready slowly and clipped her harness on while she wagged her tail ready for our usual walk. The air was fresh and cool, and for a little while I forgot about the tension with Karen, because nothing seemed more healing than the steady rhythm of paws beside me and the comfort of knowing I was not alone. As we passed a few houses, some neighbors waved kindly, and one even said how beautiful and well-behaved my dog was, which made me smile because it reminded me that most people understood the truth about her. But just as peace started to settle back into my chest, the sound of a door slamming made me freeze. It was Karen's door, and she stepped outside with her arms folded, her face already twisted in annoyance, though I had done nothing at all. I gave her a polite nod, but she only narrowed her eyes and muttered something under her breath. I tried to keep walking, reminding myself that her opinion didn't matter. But my service dog suddenly tensed beside me and gave a low whimper as if sensing something wrong. I followed her gaze, and that was when I saw it. Karen was holding the same spray can I had noticed before, her fingers already tight around the nozzle. Before I could react, she stepped forward, and with a sharp motion she sprayed directly toward my dog's face. The hiss of chemicals filled the air, and in an instant my dog yelped in pain, twisting her head back and stumbling against me. My heart stopped and anger surged through my veins as I pulled her close, shouting at Karen to stop, but she only sneered and said the dog didn't belong here. Panic gripped me because my service dog's eyes were watering and she was pawing at her face while crying softly. The sound broke something inside me because she had always been my strength, yet now she was suffering and I could not protect her in time. Neighbors gasped and a few ran over. One woman shouting at Karen asking what was wrong with her. But Karen crossed her arms smugly and said she was only defending her property. Her voice cold and cruel as if spraying a helpless animal was nothing. I knelt on the ground holding my trembling dog while tears blurred my vision, fear and rage mixing inside me as I tried to wipe her face with my sleeve, praying that the spray hadn't done permanent damage. My hands shook so badly I could hardly steady her. One kind neighbor rushed to bring water and together we tried to rinse the dog's eyes and fur while Karen stood there smirking as though she had won something. In that moment I realized she hadn't just disliked us. She hated us enough to cause real harm, and my heart ached because my dog never hurt anyone. She only gave love, yet here she was shaking against me because of cruelty. I wanted to scream, to call the police right then and there, but I was so focused on helping her breathe again that my words stuck in my throat. Some neighbors sided with me, offering towels and comfort, while others whispered, uneasily glancing at Karen as if afraid of taking a stand. The division stung almost as much as the attack itself. My dog finally rested her head weakly against my lap, her eyes red and watery, and I stroked her fur, whispering that she was safe now, though inside I felt broken and powerless. I lifted my head and stared at Karen with every ounce of anger in my soul, but she only shrugged and said the dog deserved it, that she would do it again if she had to. My chest burned because I knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning of something darker. I clutched my dog tighter and promised myself I wouldn't let Karen get away with this. Not when it was more than cruelty, not when it was an attack on the one being that kept me alive. And as the sun lowered in the sky, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, I could feel something shift. The air heavy with tension. The neighbors silent, Karen still smirking, and me shaking with fury, knowing that a line had been crossed and nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the attack felt heavy and endless because every time I looked at my service dog lying by my side, I remembered her painful cry and the way she trembled in my arms, and it tore me apart inside knowing that she had been harmed for no reason other than hate. I tried to stay strong for her because she still wagged her tail weakly, as if telling me she was okay, but my heart knew she was still hurting, and that anger inside me grew every time I thought of Karen's cruel smile. At first I hoped the neighbors would unite with me against such cruelty, but what happened instead shocked me. Some of them came over bringing food, water, and gentle words telling me they were horrified by what Karen did, and they would support me if I went to the HOA or the police. Their kindness gave me a little hope, and I held on to that, but not everyone was on my side because whispers started spreading in the neighborhood that maybe the dog had provoked Karen, or maybe I had exaggerated what happened. One evening when I stepped outside with my service dog still shaky on her feet, I heard two neighbors talking quietly near their mailbox, and one of them said that Karen told everyone my dog barked aggressively at her, and she only acted in self-defense. My stomach twisted hearing the lies because my service dog had never barked in aggression, not once in her life. She was trained to comfort and to guide, not to harm, but lies can spread faster than truth, and I could feel the doubt growing around me. Soon the HOA sent me a letter reminding me of community rules about pets. And though they didn't accuse me directly, the message was clear. Karen's influence was reaching farther than I imagined. I felt trapped because the place that was supposed to be home was turning against me. Still, there were brave voices who stood up. One elderly neighbor knocked on my door, and with tears in her eyes told me she saw everything that day, and she knew Karen had lied. She promised to speak up if it came to it. Her words gave me strength and reminded me that not everyone could be fooled. My service dog leaned against her leg as if thanking her too. Yet the tension only grew heavier each day. When I walked past Karen's house, she would glare at me and sometimes whisper to others, making sure I could see them laughing together. It felt like a war of silence and stares, and I hated it because all I wanted was peace. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset and petting my dog, a younger neighbor walked by nervously. He glanced around before slipping something into my hand. It was a small USB drive, and he whispered quickly that I should watch it when I was alone. Confused, I went inside and plugged it into my laptop, and what I saw made my heart race. It was a phone recording from across the street on the day of the attack. The video clearly showed Karen spraying my dog without warning while I screamed and held her. The proof was undeniable, and my hands shook as I watched it again and again. Tears filled my eyes, not just from sadness but from relief, because finally there was something solid. Something no lie could twist. I knew then that Karen's smirk would not last forever. She thought she could bend the truth and turn the community against me, but now I had evidence that could change everything. Still, my mind raced with questions. Would the HOA ignore it? Would the neighbors who believed her lies admit they were wrong? Would the police even care? I didn't know. But what I did know was that the battle was no longer hopeless. My dog rested her head on my lap as if sensing the shift in me, and I whispered to her that we finally had a chance. That soon the truth would shine through the shadows. But even as I whispered those words, a strange fear lingered inside me, because sometimes when you corner someone who thrives on control, they strike back even harder. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't finished yet, that she had more venom waiting, and the thought of what she might do next made my chest heavy as the night closed in around us, leaving me staring into the dark with both fear and determination burning inside. That night I barely slept because the image of Karen spraying my dog and the sound of her cruel laughter kept replaying in my head, and even though I now had the video proof, I felt restless and torn between fear and determination. In the morning I sat at the kitchen table with my dog curled up by my feet, still weak but loyal as ever, and I stared at the USB drive, knowing that it was my only weapon against all the lies. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and thought about dialing the police. Because deep down I knew what Karen did was not just cruelty. It was against the law, but part of me worried they might not care or might dismiss it as a neighbor dispute. My heart raced at the thought of standing up against her, because Karen had already poisoned so many minds in the community, and if the police ignored me, it would only make things worse. I sat there whispering to my dog, telling her I would protect her no matter what, and that gave me courage. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed. When the dispatcher answered, I explained everything, my voice shaking as I described how Karen sprayed chemicals on my service dog and how I had proof on video. The dispatcher's tone shifted to seriousness, and she told me an officer would be sent to speak with me. My heart pounded as I hung up, part of me relieved but part of me terrified about what would come next. Not long after, the sound of a car pulling into the street made me step outside, and sure enough, it was a police cruiser. Karen was in her yard pulling weeds, but the moment she saw the flashing lights, her expression froze for just a second before she put on that smug smile again. Pretending she had nothing to hide, the officer stepped out and greeted me, politely asking to hear my side of the story. I told him everything from the beginning, from the stairs to the threats to the moment my dog screamed in pain, and as I spoke, tears filled my eyes because reliving it was like ripping open a wound. The officer listened carefully and nodded before asking if I had evidence. With shaking hands, I gave him the USB drive and explained what was on it. He said they would check it immediately. Meanwhile, Karen strutted over, acting bold and loud, telling the officer that I was lying and that my dog was aggressive and dangerous. She repeated her story with confidence as though she had rehearsed it, even calling a few neighbors over to back her up. My chest tightened hearing them echo her lies. But then the officer held up his hand and said he would watch the footage before making any judgment. Karen tried to laugh it off, saying videos could be fake, but there was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. I stood silently stroking my dog's head, trying to keep calm, though inside I was boiling with rage. The officer went back to his car to review the recording, and those few minutes felt like an eternity. Karen kept muttering insults under her breath while her friends glared at me. I felt small and alone, but then I looked at my dog and remembered why I had to fight. Suddenly the officer returned, his face more serious than before. He turned to Karen and asked her if she realized what she had done. Karen scoffed and said she had done nothing wrong. But the officer's next words made the entire street go silent. He said in a steady voice, "Do you understand this is a federal crime?" Karen's smirk vanished instantly, her face going pale and her mouth opening slightly as though she couldn't breathe. She tried to protest, but the officer cut her off, saying that harming a service dog was not just an HOA issue or a neighborhood quarrel. It was a violation of federal law and could carry severe consequences. My heart leapt hearing those words, because finally someone with authority was standing up for the truth. Karen's hands began to shake, and for the first time since I met her, she looked uncertain. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. The neighbors who had defended her suddenly fell silent. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but also fear, because I knew the battle was not over yet. The officer told me more steps would follow and that an investigation would continue. Then he looked Karen in the eye and said this was very serious. Karen's pale face twitched, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned her gaze away, pretending to pick at her shirt, as though ignoring reality would make it go away. My dog pressed against my leg as if sensing the tension lifting slightly, but my own chest still felt tight. Because while Karen was shaken, the story was far from finished. I knew deep inside that she would not accept defeat easily, And as the police cruiser pulled away, leaving Karen standing pale and silent in her yard, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm had only just begun and the worst was still waiting ahead. The hours after the police left felt heavy, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, because for the first time Karen's mask had cracked, and everyone saw her go pale when the officer told her she had broken federal law. But instead of relief flooding me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to celebrate that justice was finally moving forward, yet another part of me felt the weight of fear because I knew people like Karen never back down easily. My service dog lay by my side, her breathing steadier now, though her eyes were still red and sore. I stroked her gently, whispering that she was safe, while my own mind replayed every word the officer had said. Neighbors avoided eye contact for the rest of the day, and some even crossed the street when they saw me, as though they didn't want to be caught taking sides. The division cut deep, but I told myself that the truth was finally stronger than the lies. Later that evening, there was a knock on my door, and when I opened it, two of the neighbors who had stayed silent before stood there nervously holding their phones. They admitted they had seen what happened too, but had been too scared to speak against Karen. Now that the police were involved, they wanted to do the right thing. They handed me their recordings and promised they would testify if needed. Tears filled my eyes because for the first time I felt like the wall of isolation around me was breaking. After they left, I sat on the couch holding my dog close. While watching the new videos, every angle, every cruel second, every proof that Karen had indeed attacked my innocent companion, I sent everything to the officer handling the case, and his quick reply telling me the evidence was strong gave me hope. Still, the silence of the night felt uneasy, as though danger still lingered just outside. The next day, officers returned to speak with more neighbors, and they interviewed me again, asking about the history with Karen. I told them about the stares, the muttered threats, and the smear campaign she had spread through the HOA. Their expressions hardened as they wrote everything down and reassured me that the law took service dog protection very seriously. Meanwhile, Karen stayed locked in her house most of the time, though once I caught her peeking through her blinds, glaring at me with eyes full of fury and fear. I knew she was realizing her power over the neighborhood was slipping away, but knowing that only made her more unpredictable. My heart ached with every glance at my dog because she had never asked for any of this. She had only given love and support. Yet she was the one who suffered the most. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the lead officer came back and sat with me on the porch. He explained slowly that harming a service dog carried fines, jail time, and federal charges, and that Karen's case was being forwarded for prosecution. Hearing those words made my chest swell with both relief and disbelief. It felt surreal that the truth was finally being seen by those who had the power to act. Still, I could not shake the memory of Karen's pale face and trembling hands. It haunted me, not out of pity but out of worry, because when people lose their control, they sometimes lash out in desperate ways. My service dog leaned her head against my lap as if telling me to stay strong, and I promised her aloud that no matter what came next, I would never let her face harm again. The neighborhood seemed quieter now, yet the tension was far from gone. Some neighbors whispered apologies while others still avoided me, afraid of being involved. The HOA board sent out a neutral email pretending to care about peace but not daring to mention Karen's name. I knew they were afraid too, but none of that mattered anymore because the truth was no longer a secret. It was in the hands of the law. Still, as I stood by the window that night staring at Karen's dark house across the street, my heart beat faster because I could almost feel her eyes behind those blinds, watching, waiting. And I knew this wasn't the end. Justice was on its way, but storms always roar the loudest before they break, and something deep inside whispered that Karen's worst move was yet to come. The day of reckoning finally arrived, and it began quietly like any other morning, with the sun shining through my curtains and my service dog nudging me gently to wake up, her eyes softer now, though still carrying the memory of pain she had endured. But this morning felt different. There was a weight in the air, as if the entire neighborhood was waiting for something to happen, and when the sound of police cars rolling slowly down the street reached my ears, I knew that moment had come. I stepped outside with my dog at my side, her harness secured not just for support but as a symbol of what this fight had been about, and I saw the officers gather at Karen's house. She stepped out in a hurry, her voice raised and angry as she argued with them, her hands flailing in the air, but there was no confidence in her words this time, only fear dripping through every shout. Neighbors gathered quietly on their porches, watching the scene unfold, whispers spreading like fire, some shocked, some relieved, and some simply curious. I stood silently, my dog pressed against my leg. As the lead officer told Karen about the charges she was facing, the words, "federal crime," Echoing across the street once more, this time louder, clearer, undeniable. Karen's face drained of color, her knees seemed to shake, and though she tried to yell back about conspiracies and lies, no one believed her any more. The neighbors who once sided with her now stayed silent, their eyes downcast, as if ashamed of ever trusting her. The officer informed her that she was under arrest, and in that instant all the power she had clung to, all the control she had enjoyed, vanished like smoke in the wind. She froze, her voice breaking into weak protests, but the handcuffs clicked shut, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a true wave of relief wash over me. I held my dog tighter, whispering that it was finally over, but even then emotions tangled inside me, anger, sadness, exhaustion, and relief all mixed together, because while justice was being served, nothing could erase the pain she had caused my loyal companion. The officers led Karen to the car, her head low, her pale face filled with shock and disbelief, as if she had never imagined that her cruelty would carry consequences, and as she passed by my house, she looked at me with eyes no longer sharp with hate but dull with fear. I did not look away. I held my dog and met her stare because I wanted her to know that we had survived her storm. The police cars drove off and the street grew quiet again, only now the silence felt different. It was no longer filled with tension, but with a strange sense of freedom. Neighbors slowly approached, some apologizing for staying silent, others offering words of support. One elderly neighbor hugged me with tears in her eyes, telling me she had prayed for this moment, and I realized that though the community had been divided, truth had finally cut through the lies. The HOA board later sent an official statement condemning Karen's actions and promising changes to prevent such cruelty in the future. Though their words came late, they still mattered because they marked the end of Karen's influence. My service dog rested calmly at my feet, tail wagging gently, as if she too felt the weight lifting from our lives. I knelt down, kissed her head, and whispered that she was my hero because even in her pain she had given me strength to keep fighting. And as the sun set, painting the sky in gold and crimson, I stood on the porch holding her close, promising her that no one would ever hurt her again. This fight had left scars, but it had also given me a voice I never knew I had, and in that voice I found power, not just for myself but for her, for us, for every person who relied on a loyal companion to survive the battles life threw at them. Karen was gone, the fear was gone, and though the memories would linger, I chose to hold on to the truth that love and loyalty had triumphed over cruelty and hate. My dog lifted her head, her eyes bright again. And in that moment I knew we had not just survived, we had won together, stronger than ever, ready to step forward into a future where no storm could break us again.